Hello, everybody. Happy Friday. No Norwich City game to preview this weekend, but we thought we'd come in with the show as usual, sort of more of a Q&A format. So we want your comments and questions. If not, the show could be quite short. So if you've got any questions, whether it be around the men's teams, the women's teams, the international break, our lives, whatever it might be, get them down below and we'll try our best to answer them. But Connor, before we sort of get into those questions, how are you finding the international break? It's always kind of that period in the season where if results aren't going your way, you may be waiting for an international break to come around. But when you're flying and things are really positive like they are at the moment, even though that sort of defeat against Rotherham just before the break, it hasn't really dampened the mood. I think, everyone wants to be back at Carrow Road next Saturday quite desperately. So how are you finding the break?
Nice, welcome. I think after just purely because of deadline day and how frenetic and how mental that all went, I think it's been quite nice to have a week of reflection. And I think actually, when you see an international break on the horizon, it's but I actually think by the time you get to this stage, and we're about obviously to head into the weekend, by the time you get through the other side, you're kind of back in that cycle, aren't you? And you're kind of switched on. So they never feel as long when you're in them. And then you get to the end of them and it's a bit like, wow, that was actually a bit longer than I thought it was. So, no, it's come at a good time, personally. Good time for Norwich as well, I think. And gives them an opportunity maybe to take stock a little bit. Not ideal the way that they've headed into the break with a defeat. But I think very hard to reflect on what they've done so far with anything but positivity, to be honest, compared to maybe where we all thought it was going to be in pre-season. So, it's probably it's a weird one because I'm not sure if the players and David Wagner would have wanted a game after or quickly after what happened after Rotherham and not allowed that to stew in the way that it's going to be now. But yeah, it's been a nice week just to kind of chill out a little bit.
Yeah, of course, there is a game at Carrow Road this weekend, which we'll come round to a little bit later on in the show. Norwich City Women are at home against Cambridge United Women with George Wilson, our reporter. He's going to be, he's done a little segment with Connor, which we're going to play in just a moment. But Connor, the news this morning, Gabriel Sara, Championship Player of the Month. I mean, who's surprised, really? The man of the moment for the month, really, didn't win the Norwich City award. That went to Johnny Rowe, but he's won the Championship title, of course. 1 goal, 2 assists. I think it's 17 or 19 chance creations. He's just a different gravy of a player, isn't he?
Yeah, you can take off month, I think, player of whatever you want to add in there. Yeah, just superb. And I mean, I've spoken about Gabriel Sara before, but I think the best compliment I can give to him of many, and there are so many you can give him. Actually, there's 2. I'll give you 2. The first one is that I think in the majority of the games that he's played, maybe barring the last 2 where he's a little bit quieter, he has been the best player on the pitch of both teams. And I think that particularly to that Southampton game, because that was maybe the purest example in that you've got a team there who have just got relegated from the Premier League, spent a lot of money on players. Gabriel Sara was the best player on the pitch that day at St Mary's. And I think that's probably the best compliment that you can pay him, because he's that good of a player that he is kind of taking on that now and grabbing games and controlling games. And the second one I wanted to add was, and I think I told this anecdote on the podcast, but there was a moment last week, just before I went to record my verdict at the New York Stadium, and we were I was kind of making my way back out from the press conference room to I won't get into the boring, but I was picking up a tripod to then get back out, basically. And kind of ran into this Rotherham journalist who covers them every week. And he was absolutely raving about Gabriel Sara in that particularly in the second half, and the influence that he had, and how Norwich's slight tweak to drop in a little bit deeper had a big impact on the game. And so we were speaking about him a little bit, and it's, where does he come from, and all this sort of thing, how have Norwich been able to recruit there, and that's then a 10-minute anecdote. But underpinning it all was like the fact he was so impressed with Gabriel Sara, and I had to turn around and say, I think that's probably the worst game I've seen him play in about 6 months. So that's how good he is. He's getting compliments even when he maybe doesn't hit the levels that he's expected to reach. And I think, and I've said this before, in terms of importance to the way David Wagner wants to play, to the way Norwich City operate right now, he probably is as important to David Wagner as Emi Buendia was to Daniel Farke, which feels like a big statement, but I think it's true. And for a while, the feeling around him has been he could be the next one to go for a lot of money. I think it is now he will be the next one to go for a lot of money for Norwich City. And the hope, obviously, is that that's not for the foreseeable future. So thoroughly deserved, brilliant footballer. really looking forward to seeing him in action when he, gets back to full fitness, because he's not even there yet, which is a scary prospect. So thoroughly deserved. I thought with the options of the list, it was a pretty no-brainer, to be honest. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing the levels he hits. But one thing is for sure, Adam, he's not a secret anymore.
No, you're not wrong there. A real talent and someone who's an absolute joy to watch week in, week out at the moment. Connor, just before we sort of get into these comments and questions that are now flooding through, Jonathan Tomkinson loan deal was announced during the week. One that was, well, you sort of touted it there on the deadline day, and everyone was a bit confused where it was. It was announced, was it yesterday, I think, or day before, that he's got a loan deal down there at Bradford City, League Two. That's obviously going to be a difficult opportunity for him in terms of, League Two football is quite physical. It's going to be very different from playing in the sort of under-21s at Norwich, or even kind of the senior appearances he's made for the club so far. It's going to be a different test for him. What are your hopes maybe for that one? Is it just getting minutes in the tank, or just sort of maybe being in a different sort of culture, a different club? What that benefits could that have for Norwich in the future?
Yeah, I think it's minutes, isn't it? That's what he needed at this stage of his development. And I've seen it argued because of Norwich's centre-back situation that, they could have been a role for him in the team. And I get those arguments. I do think with young players generally, you have to take a bit more of a longer-term view. And yes, in the here and now, would it have been more beneficial for Norwich to have Jonathan Tomkinson as fourth choice? Absolutely. But then you have to weigh it up. And I think it's pertinent when we talk about someone like Idah, for example, where for a long time Norwich maybe took what was the club's best interest, which was for him to occupy a role behind Teemu Pukki. And now we get to a stage where we are now where he's not played a lot of minutes, and maybe his development hasn't been best served by being at the club for a long period of time. So I always think that, yes, it could being the word, it could leave Norwich a bit short in the long term, absolutely. But equally, it could really benefit them if he goes out and has a wonderful loan and comes back ready to challenge next season in a better place. So I think you always have to take a little bit of a longer term view on young players. And I think it would have been harsh on him to keep him as what would have been a fourth choice, really, until Grant Hanley came back, and then would have been even further down the pecking order. You rob him of half a season of football because someone could get injured or something could happen, which is, it feels to me that would be a little bit silly. So I think it's the pragmatic decision to get him back out in League Two. He's been a little bit unlucky this summer, really. He was pretty close to a move to Stockport by all accounts on loan, which fell through. I think just them dragging their heels a little bit, to be frank. And then obviously the injury that he did in pre-season came at a really unfortunate time for him as well, and maybe narrowed his options a little bit in terms of the window. And obviously this has popped up quite late for him. And you're right, I think we were all kind of waiting to hear, has it gone? Has it not gone? I think from Norwich's side, there was always confidence that it had. I think there were a few bits, obviously, there to wait for league approval and various different aspects at the Bradford end that prolongs it a little bit. So, no, really pleased for him. And obviously last year he had that loan at Stevenage and he didn't quite get the minutes that everyone would have hoped for because Steve Evans opted for experience in a promotion run and his team was pretty settled. So if he can go there, get a lot of minutes, perform really well, help Bradford get towards the top end of League Two, then I think everyone next summer will be looking at it as a really beneficial year for his development. So really, really good move for him, actually, I think, at this stage. And if he does really well, they, of course, have the option in January to assess it and see whether he needs to be pushed up a level. So I think it's a win for all parties. But for him, mainly, I'm delighted after what's been quite a difficult summer that he's got to move.
Yeah, we'll be watching that one with keen interest. Things like Brad Hills has become a sort of real, I suppose, fan favourite down at Accrington. So hopefully Tomkinson can have a similar effect at Bradford. We'll dip into some of the comments now. Liam, afternoon, guys. Afternoon, Liam. Hope you're doing well. Jeffman, I think a result in a Leicester game will be massive indication of how our season could go. Win or draw, and I'll be very optimistic for what we can do this season. I mean, Collar, the next two at home, Stoke and Leicester. What are you feeling towards that one? Sort of we haven't played a home now game since the Millwall game. Feels like absolutely ages ago. So how big maybe are the next two games in sort of what will transpire for Norwich City and the rest of the season?
I think they're big for narrative, perhaps more than anything else, because I think they're in a predicament where, because of that defeat to Rotherham, if they then I don't know what would be a quantity of points that would be needed. I don't think we're at that stage, but certainly if they got two results maybe and they went without two wins in those two games, or they won one and lost the other, I think there would maybe be now some conversations about, I can already see the narrative down the track and me having to ask people questions about whether a bubble has burst and all of this kind of stuff. So I think it's really important for narrative. How sort of big is it for their season as a whole? I don't think it's huge and sort of massive at this point, but really good test. And the comment was right there, because Leicester, I haven't been that blown away by Leicester, I must be honest. I kind of see them in a similar situation to where Norwich were when they were winning games under Dean Smith in the early part of last season, where it was individual quality kind of bringing them over the line. I think with them, there is obviously the feeling that they will improve over time. Will they improve to the levels that they need to win the league? I don't know. They've obviously had a defeat to Hull as well, so I think that challenge is interesting. I think Stoke will be in and around the top 6 mix as well, and they've started pretty well under Alex Neil, although a bit patchier than maybe they would like. So I think they're two really good tests. And if Norwich can overcome one, and I would say 4 points, if you looked at it from the here and now and said 4 points out of the two would be excellent. Wouldn't be particularly upset with 3, if I'm honest. But I think anything maybe below that, if they didn't win any of those two, then I think there would maybe be, again, a little bit of narrative come in, a few nerves come in as well. And suddenly it just looks like a good start, doesn't it? If you then go through without a win. So, they're big games. They're not decisive games, I don't think. So that's kind of my view on it. And Leicester in particular, I'm just really intrigued to see how Norwich stand up to that test against a team that has been picked by a lot of people to be among the best. They're one of the Premier League sides. They did very well at Southampton. Were pretty unlucky not to win that game. I would argue they probably could have lost it as well on a different day. So by that measure, I think a draw was probably about right. So I'm intrigued to see where they do with Leicester and whether that can be a measuring stick for their progress. So yeah, big for narrative, and sort of remains to be seen, I guess, how big it will be for the overall season.
Yeah, Plymouth, of course, the one after a first away game back after those two. Dan Mayhew must be liking the lack of away day travelling, the lack of traffic too. We do have Plymouth up next. Yeah, that one's actually one I'm quite looking forward to. Of course, a different ground, and I suppose, an opportunity to, a reunion with Barley Mumba, so that would be an interesting narrative. Tom Carlton on Facebook: hi lads, do you foresee another prized asset being sold in January, even if we're in a strong league position? I mean, that's an interesting question, Connor, because I suppose with Josh Sargent being out now until, around about the Christmas time, early January, that probably sort of maybe pushes him aside for that conversation. But Gabriel Sara, I mean, if there's going to be Premier League teams sniffing surely in January if he's, maintaining the form he's in at the moment.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I think we've got a pretty real example to move this back to, which is in January when Norwich had a big bid for Andrew Omobamidele, bigger than what they've ended up selling him for in truth. And they didn't sell. They didn't buckle at that offer. So from that indication, you would think they would only do it if the amount of money put on the table was pretty drastic. So if they do it, it will be because the fee is well in excess of a valuation for a player. So they don't need to. And I think, everything that me and Paddy mapped out in the explainer video with the shares kind of speaks about that a little bit. We recorded that kind of pre-documents dropping. So the only bit I would add around that is that some of the debt that the club took on from loans, which was 66 million, as listed in their company accounts, half of that's been taken on by Mark Attanasio, 33 million. And then the other half, of course, is going to be consumed by player sales, a lot of which they've done this summer. So I'd say there's the necessity to do one in the next year. But the fact that they've done Aaron's, Rashica, Omobamidele, plus obviously the Attanasio side of things does square them off from a financial perspective. So it's not an imperative, but we know the way the club is run. If an offer is received that meets their valuation, is too good to turn down, I think they'll give it serious thought. But you would hope if Norwich City, and again, this comes into it, if they're in a position where they're pushing for a promotion or they're pushing for the playoffs, and it would have a negative impact on them, a detrimental impact on them from a competitive standpoint, you would hope, unless a player was really kicking off about it, which I don't really see anyone in this group at the moment who would do that. You'd like to think they wouldn't do it. So that's maybe I'm sat on the fence a little bit, but at this moment in time, then there's not a financial necessity to do that in January. Next summer, probably, I would imagine summer to summer is probably a better way of measuring these things than summer to January. Obviously, if they did sell, it would allow them to do other bits in January. But I think there's maybe a little pot of money, not much, if they did need to dip in again.
Yeah, midfield duo. Kenny McLean is the other one who sits alongside Sara and Dan Mayhew. I think Kenny McLean summed it up well that Sara is vital. One of the best things in the last transfer window was that he wasn't sold. I assume you're referring there to Kenny McLean, Dan, and it was that interest supposedly from Leeds, but that seems to be one that was probably more linked to them trying to get Glenn Kamara in the building. How impressed have you been with Kenny McLean so far this season, Connor? He's taken over the captain's armband, and he's kind of been a little bit of a, I suppose, Marmite figure amongst Norwich City fans in the past. There's been criticism for him, lots of praise for him. I know Sam Seaman's probably his biggest supporter, and he's a player who's, I think, gone a little bit under the radar at just how crucial he's been. So, I mean, what have you made of it, and how crucial is it that Norwich City did keep him this window?
Yeah, massively impressed with him. I think actually since David Wagner's come in, if you were to look at it, I think he's probably been the most consistent Norwich City performer game to game. He had that spell towards the back end of the season where he was injured, and I don't think it's a coincidence that Norwich City's results nosedived as a consequence. And I wrote a column about this a couple of weeks ago, but actually I'm seeing a lot from Kenny McLean under David Wagner that I saw from Jonathan Hogg under David Wagner during his time at Huddersfield, and playing in a very similar role. Very similar qualities. I think Jonathan Hogg was viewed in a slightly different way. There was always this conversation about whether he was going slightly under the radar or was a little bit underrated. And I think Kenny McLean's game has improved tenfold, really. And I remember being in Scotland for the pre-season before last under Dean Smith, and there was a game at Celtic, and he was the player that was put up post-match, and we were kind of talking to him about playing in a deeper role, and it was well, yeah, it's not my favourite, but I'll do it, and obviously that's where a lot of his football is coming from now, and I think he's really adapted to that role very well. And for all the brilliance that we spoke about with Gabriel Sara, the fact he's got someone as consistent and as dependable as Kenny McLean behind him allows him to do a lot of the stuff from a forward perspective that he's been able to do. And I know the way he gets kind of viewed and the pointing and all of those various elements, but behind that is a very, very good player with very, very good qualities, particularly at this level. So yeah, I think he's absolutely integral to what Norwich City are trying to do. And I don't think the numbers lie either. I did have it in my column if you want to go and read that. But the numbers around him playing and Norwich's win ratio compared to him not playing and Norwich's win ratio are pretty stark. So that goes to show, I think, a player's influence more than anything else.
Yeah, a few questions here. Righty on YouTube, hope you're well this afternoon, Righty. Afternoon, gents. It's taken a lot of criticism that the recruitment team deserves a massive well done for digging out Sara. All the scouting networks have failures, but finding regular gems is what Norwich City are trying to do at the moment, and must go down as one of the best windows in a while. I think he's referring to this one, of course. Very solid for the now additions that have filled many of the attributes we needed. Favourite addition, I think Fashnak's been massively underrated. Connor, favourite addition, I think for me, probably one that maybe not necessarily caught me off guard, but someone I wasn't overly excited around is Ashley Barnes when he arrived through the door. And we then done that sit down with him at the forum, and I thought this guy's got a little bit of hunger, and I could see what he's trying to bring to the group. And I think you can see it, when you see him with the various players before games over on the pitch, and he seems to be a popular figure amongst the whole group. And there's been a few anecdotes we've heard about sort of the character off the field that he's brought to the club. Your favourite addition though, Connor? I mean, Ashley Barnes has been good on the pitch for me as well as off the pitch, but yeah, your thoughts on that one?
Ashley Barnes, yeah, just like whenever you ask a player about him, you mention his name, and I just find myself smiling, to be honest, because he's been really good for Norwich for a few reasons. The ones that you listed there, standard setting, he's been brilliant on the pitch, barring that Rotherham game, which I thought was probably his poorest so far. But also, I think he's shifted the image a little bit as well of Norwich. And Chris Sutton said this actually in his column for us, where you think of Norwich, and a lot of people externally, I know we maybe think of it slightly differently here in Norfolk, but a lot of people externally think nice club, going to Carrow Road is nice, it'll be pleasant, He is it's very lazy, very easy to compare him to Grant Holt, but so I don't want to do that. But he's stylistically quite like that. He's kind of, him and Shane Duffy in tandem really have kind of broken that image a little bit. They've made them tougher. They look like real men on the pitch, and I just think he's gone understated as well with what he's done on the pitch and how he's done that. Fashnak, I'd agree with Wrighty, has been really impressed with him, and I think every game you see him play, there's something that he'll do, and you go, oh, yeah, okay, that's nice. But we haven't obviously seen Borja signs yet. I'm incredibly excited about him. So yeah, purely for impact on what they've done so far, I think Ashley Barnes has been really impressive, and he's very funny to watch on the pitch at how he conducts himself with officials. Not that we condone that sort of behaviour, and opposition defenders as well. I often think if someone flashed a mirror in front of him during a game, he'd try and start an argument with himself. So that's the best way of describing Ashley Barnes. But yeah, really enjoyed watching him, probably more than like you, probably more than I thought I would do.
Yeah, celebration at Huddersfield I thought was absolutely brilliant, to be honest, winding up the home fans. Liam Winnell, do you think this is Lance Chance Saloon for Flynn Clark? Of course, joined Dagenham and Redbridge on loan there on transfer deadline day. The man's got a little bit of controversy around him at the moment, regarding off-field matters. But, whenever I watch him for the under-21s, I've always thought there's a real talent in there, and someone who, in terms of creative spark and attacking midfield position, is someone who could potentially affect Norwich in the future in the first team. But it's not really worked out for him at the moment. So what are your thoughts on that one, Connor? How important is this Dagenham Redbridge loan spell for maybe his career, whether that be at Norwich or maybe even trying to move up the pecking order in terms of the league structure?
Yeah, it's important. He's another one I think got quite a serious injury at a bad time for him, and it's a young player that can make or break you really. If you kind of have to get a little bit of luck with fitness, and he hasn't had that. It was pretty serious last season, I think, when he went out on loan to Walsall and came back and then got a pretty bad injury. So it's not panned out in the way that he would have liked. I think when he moved from Peterborough, where he was very, very highly rated and had a championship appearance, I think, under his belt at that stage. So. Yeah, I don't think it's worth us commenting too much on what's happened off the pitch. People can go and read about that, and it's a live thing. So I don't really want to pass comment or judgment on that particularly until we kind of know exactly where we stand with that. And he's kind of had a day in court, so to speak. But I think we'll be watching him with interest. Like you, I've always seen flashes of a really good player in there, particularly technically. Whether he can do that in the National League, which is a grueling, pretty unforgiving division at points, I don't know. So. Big moment for him. He'll be hoping to go there, perform well, boast some good numbers, and possibly look to get himself in the shop window next summer would be my guess.
Yeah, Gary on YouTube saying, how do you think Hwang shapes up as a direct replacement for Sargent, or will David Wagner have to tactically change things to accommodate? I mean, Colin done a really good chat actually with a South Korean football expert this week, which you can go and find on our YouTube channel, where he maybe speaks about kind of the player, the history, and maybe his attributes. But Connor, just very briefly, what can he bring, and does he suit the Norwich City system in terms of a direct replacement for Josh Sargent?
Yeah, well, it was quite interesting. I was speaking to Steve Hahn, who, as you mapped out there, is an absolute wizard in terms of South Korean football. And it was quite interesting. I saw a lot of concern on his face when he was kind of speaking about this low move, and particularly him playing in the Championship, because he didn't necessarily feel that physicality was his strong point. More very intelligent in the press, leads the press very well, wants to kind of try and spin and get in behind people, and he's kind of a box player more than anything else. And when I kind of mapped out to him that he'd be playing alongside Ashley Barnes, who maybe takes a lot of that physicality on his shoulders and does all the stuff that we spoke about a minute ago, he suddenly seemed a lot more positive about the move and his prospects of fitting in there. So whether he can bring exactly the same qualities as not Adam Idah, as Josh Sargent does, remains to be seen. But for me, he sounds like he's someone that's going to stretch the game. We've spoken a lot about that after that Rotherham defeat and how they didn't do that quite enough, as David Wagner said as well. So if he can do that, then you would imagine that there shouldn't really be any massive need to change how they want to go about things, nor do I think they would really. I think they're pretty settled in the way that David Wagner wants to play. So it's a big opportunity. So it's going to be a really interesting battle, I think, when we come back from the international break to see who grasps that between Adam Idah and Hwang Ui-jo. And obviously, I would imagine he's going to be at a slight disadvantage in the fact that he hasn't had 2 weeks to train with the group. So he's going to be coming in quite fresh. And that, I would imagine, will probably give Idah the nod for the Stoke game. And then it will really be down to whether or not he can come on and make an impact off the bench. So, I'm really intrigued by him just because of his trajectory, the way he's come through Asia into European football, played for some excellent clubs in Europe, hasn't quite worked out all the time. Feels a bit kind of spoke about recruitment. Feels like a bit of a throwback Norwich City recruit, someone that they're maybe taking a chance on in hope that maybe he recaptures what he's shown in the past and what he's done in the past. They certainly rate him highly in South Korea. So let's see. But I think with the three, they've got a really interesting staple of strikers now. The one thing that I would make people aware of is that in January, and again helped by a little bit by the fact that Josh Sargent is going to come back, but Hwang is actually scheduled, if he gets selected, to go away and compete in the Asian Games in Qatar with South Korea between about mid-January and mid-February. So Norwich could potentially be without him for a month. So if he's absolutely set fire by that point, that could be quite a big blow come the new year. So we'll see how that all unfolds. Like I say, Josh Sargent should be returning around that point, so that should cushion the blow a bit. But really intrigued by Hwang, and probably a lot more confidence in the move now. Well, after speaking to Steve, than perhaps I did when it first materialised, Adam.
Adam Idah, you mentioned him a few times there. Tim Crow on YouTube. Afternoon, gents. Really concerned about Idah. Just can't see much or any improvement. Surely a loan deal to see if he can perform or not would have been a better option than giving him a 5-year deal. I mean, for me, I think Adam Idah is such a confidence player that once the goals start flowing, I generally think there is a player there. It's just, at the moment, he's obviously, of course, been edged out originally by Josh Sargent, sort of was, I suppose, restricted to bench appearances, and maybe got his opportunity at Rotherham, didn't take it. But what are your thoughts on that one, Colin? Because there's certainly a player there. I mean, what does he need to do, maybe just to get the Norwich fans on side and him to start scoring some goals more regularly, I suppose, than what he has during his Norwich City career so far?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's a run, isn't it? It just needs a run of goals. I think back to that run he had in the Premier League, and it was only a few games in reality, but I think everyone's perception of Adam Idah was a lot different during that spell. So that proves that the quality is there, the attributes are there. He is capable of doing it, and it was interesting to speak to him after Huddersfield and to hear it. I asked him the question about confidence, and to hear him essentially admit that he did depend on confidence quite a lot. And I actually felt he started really slowly against Rotherham, and probably his best spell of the game came just before he was taken off, and he's starting to link the play pretty well. I've seen a few kind of mixed reports on him last night for Ireland against France. I've seen a lot of people say his hold-up play was good. I've seen quite a few people say he was pretty anonymous. I didn't watch the game last night, so I can't offer any more insight than that. But yeah, he like I spoke about with John Tomkinson, I think he has been the victim really of not having a loan spell, and it's been so difficult for him for all of Teemu Pukki's successes. He's maybe been the one who's been sort of affected adversely because of that, because he's had to sit behind him, because for Norwich to recruit any striker to play in that second fiddle role, barring Jordan Rhodes, really has been very, very difficult. And maybe Jordan Hugill as well to a separate extent, because particularly when you go with one, strikers want to play. They're a bit like goalkeepers. So he probably did need a loan, but again, the club interests had to be maybe put before him. The amount of football that he's probably played about as much football as you'd expect an 18, 19-year-old to play at this point of their career, and he's going to be 23 his next birthday. So it's a really difficult one for Adam Idah. I see lots of good qualities. I see bits that still need work. But again, and I've said this a few times, I think it's worth reiterating. I know he gets bashed around the head with a 5-year contract, but for me, it wasn't him that offered himself that. He signed it, and if we were all put in that position as an incredibly young man to be shown a real commitment to like that, I think you would sign that deal. So for me, the criticism should be more of the people who offered him that contract rather than him. I think technically, and it's a technical point, his hold-up player, I feel like sometimes he comes in a little bit flat and a bit straight. He needs, if you watch Ashley Barnes, not to maybe get really, really technical with it, but he's really good at getting his backside between the ball and gets quite a nice curved shape to him, and that just helps hold defenders off. It kind of strengthens your position a little bit. Adam Idah's just a bit too straight at points, and that's why he gets pulled off the ball a little bit too easily. So yeah, I think there's more to come from him. I think a run of goals will do him the world of good. 2 in 4, wasn't it, before that Rotherham game? So there has been a little bit of form there. And who knows? Because the thing is, from Norwich's perspective, just to kind of back up the 5-year contract thing, if he really explodes at some point and he scores, goes on a real flurry, or has one season where he does do it, he's going to be worth a lot of money very, very quickly because of the type of profile and physicality that he has. And for me, the loan point now, I think, is kind of gone. That window's gone. If he was going to go out on loan, it needs to happen for him here. So, long-winded way of saying I like him, but there's a lot of work to do, and I think he would be the first to acknowledge that, if I'm completely honest.
Yeah, quite a few more questions around youngsters. Do you think we'll see a Sara Lima midfield? I mean, Lima was announced in the 25-man squad for Norwich City this season, so I think he's one that will probably need to make his mark in the under-21s before, as David Wagner said, he will be led by the academy staff before he really looks at him and sees whether he's a player who's an option. I think at the moment, given that they've got the likes of Kenny McLean playing so well alongside Gabriel Sara, it might be a little bit of a wait on that one. Liam Winnell, how do you guys think Borja Sainz will fit in? That's a really difficult question, I think, at the moment, because given the way that Rose started the season, Fashnak's been excellent so far. Plaheta, I think, in his sort of cameo appearances at points has been relatively good and probably, coming for criticism at different points, but he's probably started to maybe prove the doubters wrong. So I think with Sainz, he's going to have to build up. Of course, he'll get some probably under 21 minutes and brief cameo appearances, and you never know with the Championship, you can get an injury pretty quickly and suddenly he has to be thrown in. So that will be an interesting one. Interesting one here from Joby. Who's the next big star to come through from the youngsters, do you think? Connor, there's quite a few, I think, now in that under-21 squad. It's an area where Norwich have recruited quite heavily this summer. The likes of Montoya, Lima, Reyes, Manning, Adebayogo, whatever his name is, the centre-back. I can't exactly pronounce his name, but sounds like Ombamadeli, very confusing. Which one of those maybe have you been most impressed with, and who's maybe the next one in the sort of, I suppose, conveyor belt to potentially make their mark in the first team?
Yeah, there's lots of excitement about Emmanuel. I've got to try and pronounce his now. Adebayogo, I think is how you say it. He's really impressed, and I think he's someone increasingly that you're hearing a lot of good noise about. Sam wrote an excellent piece on him in the week, actually, on the excitement around him and kind of his performances since moving over here as well. So he's a centre back, and again probably feeds into that Tomkinson debate a little bit, and I think Danny Bart as well, because if you've got Jaden Warner, Tomkinson, Addy, boy, I nailed it once. Emmanuel, if you've got all of them in reserve, then you don't want to be blocking that pathway. So signing someone on a 1-year deal instead of someone on a 3-year deal makes a bit more sense. So he's someone that I've heard a lot of good things about. I know the people who've watched the 21s regularly that I've spoken to really like Aidan Manning as well, who joined from Watford, central midfielder, who's done quite well. And it's been really interesting to see the shift in recruitment. We've obviously spoken about Callum Fisher a lot, who's still kind of trying to fight his way into the first team. But I've been impressed with him when he's played for Norwich at first team level. And Montoya as well. I'm hearing a lot of good reports at left back, and I'd be shocked if it wasn't too long before he came over and started training with the first team if he isn't already. So yeah, I think there's lots to be excited about from a youth perspective, and I think some of the work the recruitment team, Mariella Nisataki, who heads up that area, have done this summer has been really intriguing. So as the comment said earlier from Righty, I think you can never, recruitment's really difficult, and sometimes there can be, no matter how much work you put into it, no science why a player does work. And we've spoken about Flynn Clark as well. Sometimes injuries can affect things, or players don't adapt in the way you like, or suddenly a system doesn't suit a player because there's a managerial change. There's so much that can affect a player's development. But I think there's a really real excitement around what they've got in that under-21s group at the moment in terms of how they can push the first team squad. And actually, I think this is a really good season for a lot of them, because the Norwich squad isn't as deep as it has been in recent years. The bench has got bigger. There's going to be a lot of opportunities for those young players to come onto the bench and to make an impact. I think in the first team, you mentioned Lima as well, who I think is still in a very much an adaptation period and trying to adapt to the level a little bit. So lots to be excited about. A few names there, and we'll see if any of them get involved. Obviously, the deeper that Norwich City get into cup competitions and whatnot is more helpful for David Wagner to properly assess them.
Yeah, a few questions around the Mark Attanasio stuff. Mark Attanasio coming into the club, what do you think the focus will be on his financial input? Will this investment be on squad improvements, or will the focus be more on ground development? And Mark has a history for more long-term projects. The new stand will bring a lot more income in the long term for the club. He seems to be here for the long haul. I mean, yeah, that's certainly something that we're kind of, and the signs of, he will eventually become the majority shareholder of the football club, and hopefully that, can bring a lot of success to the team. Of course, you and Paddy done a brilliant insight video kind of explaining the situation with the current share issues which are surrounding the football club. I think the letters have now dropped on shareholders' doormats, and there's obviously a lot of implications around that Norwich need to get this over the line. Colin, just very briefly, because it's all kind of in that video you done with Paddy, just answering Yeti there, where do you think the focus of the investment is going to be from Mark?
Well, at the moment you look at it, and it's on getting Norwich City back to a financial safe ground, really getting them back on safe ground financially. It's ensuring that those loans have been taken out or repaid, and that the club is able to then go on and invest in other areas. And I saw a comment earlier about money and where has the money gone? Well, it's gone on, as money does in football, on wages, on player transfer fees. There was a hole because of COVID, although that was largely filled for Emi Buendia. They obviously had the large summer of recruitment. All of these things cost money. They're spread over a period of time. So that's where the money has gone. These loans were taken out against parachute payments if they remained in the Championship, and then if they'd have got promoted last season, it would have been against broadcast revenue. So that's why the money is perhaps where it is, and the financial situation is what it is. The fact that he's been willing to commit to taking on essentially half of that loans, 6 million of that money also going into shares, I think is a massive signal of intent and his intent in Norwich City and how he is here for the long term. And interestingly, when we first reported the story and his name first came up and you did digging into him and what he's built with the Milwaukee Brewers over a long period of time, it has been infrastructure, and it's never going to be, and it's never been about bankrolling them to success in the World Series. I think it is. My baseball knowledge isn't that great. And it would be similar for Norwich. It wouldn't be about bankrolling them from a transfer perspective. It would be probably a step up from the way the club operates now. It would still mean that the club's best players would be sold. It would still mean all of those, the emphasis on youth, but they'd probably be able to invest a little bit more whilst doing that. So instead of signing a player for 8 million, who knows, they might be able to sign a player for 15. I think that's kind of the levels we're talking. So do I see massive changes in terms of that front? Not in the short term anyway, to be honest with you. In the long term, I think there is a possibility that eventually we see a trickle down effect and maybe an attempt to make Norwich City a little bit more competitive. But I think that would have to come against some competitive improvement on the pitch as well.
Yeah, before we get your chat with George Wilson about the women's team, just going to go into Jez Davies' question on Facebook. How are your predictions at the start of the season stacking up in terms of top goal scorer, unsung hero? I think I'd have to think back, but I think I predicted Norwich to finish 8th or 9th, Gabriel Sara to be the star man, which is probably between him and Rowe at the moment, maybe. Sargent was probably in the conversation prior to the injury. Unsung hero, I think I might have put Fashnak for that one, so I think he's so far proven his worth. Colin, do you remember your predictions and how they're currently going?
No, I went 9th. I went Sarah. I don't know who I put for unsung hero. I definitely put something about Kellen Fisher in there. So I'm going to say that wasn't the worst. That wasn't the worst. It wasn't the worst shout. I do think in terms of predictions, I'll caveat with this. I think Norwich are looking a lot better than 9th at this moment in time, and you don't have to be a football expert to work that out. I also still think it's very, very early, and we know how a season can go. I think they're at a really pivotal, really interesting moment, having just lost Josh Sargent, who was so essential to the way they wanted to play. It's going to be really interesting to see what teams do against them in the future and whether they kind of utilize what Rotherham have done. And for me as well, I'd just like to see a little bit more evidence that what we've just seen at the start of the season isn't just a good run of form. I'd like to see sort of a bit more of a bigger sample size that it could be sustained. But yeah, they keep on performing like this, they'll be a top 6 side. It's not much debate about it for me. So yeah, I'm so far been proved quite wrong, I think, in terms of the predictions after 6 games, and that's exactly where I wanted to be. So I'm absolutely delighted.
A couple of questions actually very briefly before we get onto that. Would you guys accept an England loss against Scotland if it meant Kenny scored a brace and a clean sheet for Gunny? I don't know what your international allegiance is, Connor, in terms of England, but given it's a friendly, I wouldn't probably mind either way, to be honest, whether England win the game or the situation there that Jeff Mann's mapped out.
Couldn't care less, to be honest with you, to be brutally honest.
And Reece Brown on YouTube, can you see Jolis ever coming back into the Norwich team and contributing? Seems like he's doing quite well currently at Dusseldorf. It's like Bundesliga 2, scored a really good goal actually the other day. And he seems to be proving himself again, but we kind of had that where he went to FC20 and maybe there were some glimmers there of what he can do. And of course he had that sort of spell at Pauk before he came to Norwich where he was so brilliant, but it just hasn't really happened. Is there any route back for him, would you say?
I don't see it, to be honest. I don't see it. I think the best case scenario for him, for Norwich, is that he does really well, gets Fortuna Düsseldorf out of Bundesliga 2, and then that option that they have gets made into a permanent one because he's impressed so much, or even that he's impressed so much that perhaps a Bundesliga team or someone else wants to take a bit of a punt on him. He's still young enough, I think. It's a real shame because I like the commenter there. I've seen some really good glimpses out of him at points and really good moments, but just increasingly had that feeling of something that wasn't going to work from both sides, which is a real shame. And I think if it was going to happen, it would have been towards the back end of last season where David Wagner brought him back because he wanted him back in the building. So, yeah, it's as we spoke about recruitment, sometimes some transfers just don't work. There's no rhyme or reason to them. I think we may reflect on him as perhaps being one of those.
With that, we'll now get some thoughts and sort of comments from George Wilson, who's covering the Norwich City women's team at the moment. Of course, they play at Carrow Road this Sunday, as I mapped out at the start of the show. And George has been at every single game so far, and of course the women's team, 2 wins, 1 draw so far. It's been a pretty positive start to the campaign, much like the men's team. They seem to be up amongst the promotion mix. I think Ashford Town are currently top, aren't they? But that's only because they won the night after Norwich won 4-0 the other night. So we'll get that clip now, and then we'll round off the show at the end.
Who is covering Norwich City Women for us this season, doing a great job in doing that. Make sure you read all of his pieces around all of the games when they crop up. But of course, we're speaking to him in ahead of what is a really important game for Martin Herdman and his side on Sunday at Carrow Road. It's going to be a brilliant occasion, as these things always are, a kind of landmark occasion as well. It's only the 3rd time, if you include the County Cup final, that the women have played at Carrow Road. And I went last year. I'm looking forward to going on Sunday as well. The atmosphere last year, particularly given the context of how the men were doing, was probably the best of the season. So I'm looking forward to that continuing. But we thought we'd speak to George to kind of get a bit of a lowdown, bit of a preview on that game. This kind of Friday slot is usually the preview show slot, but we obviously don't have a men's game to look ahead to. So George, thank you for joining me first and foremost, amongst a couple of time changes and various bits that we won't go into. Norwich City Women at Carrow Road on Sunday. Before we get into any of how they're getting on and all of those aspects, how much are you looking forward to that as an occasion? I don't know if you went to the game earlier this year.
Thank you for having me on, first of all, Connor. But yeah, looking ahead to Sunday, I'm really looking forward to it. I didn't manage to get to the game earlier this year. It was Ashford Town in that one, wasn't it, before the County Cup final? But yeah, it's been a brilliant few weeks covering the team. Some really entertaining football, and obviously the results have come with it, thankfully for City as well. So yeah, I think it's going to be a really exciting day. I think the last time I was told the ticket sales were just under 5,000, I think.
Excellent.
But I think the club are hoping that, like it was in the game earlier this year, that there will be some walk-ins on the day, which will boost that and take it over 5,000. Although I was told as well, they're not encouraging people to walk in, because last time that did delay the kickoff. So if you're watching this and you want to go, then get your tickets before Sunday. That's their message, I think. Nevertheless,
absolutely. And you mentioned it's Cambridge United at home. So a really good club for Norwich City to be playing as well. And hopefully, you never know, they may well bring down some fans as well. Talk to us about how Norwich City have started this league campaign, George, because they've just come off the back of a 4-0 win at Cambridge City. It's a 2-2 draw with London Seaward as well at the Nest last Sunday, which I know you were at as well. How have they started this campaign? New management, new look side, really made quite a few signings this summer. How have they kind of adapted to the league campaign so far?
Like I said, it's been a really positive start. The win at Cambridge City in midweek took them top of the league, albeit temporarily, because Ashford won the following night, which put City back down to second. But realistically, of course, at this stage, the position in the table isn't that relevant. But 2 wins out of 3, the other being the draw at home to London Seaward last week. I think it's been a really positive start, considering that Martin Herdman didn't get through the door until early August. And then I think he had the friendly at Wroxham and then possibly another couple of games behind closed doors. But he had 10 days in the job. Then he was straight into the first game away at AFC Sudbury, when Norwich were really unconvincing, to be honest, and they could quite easily have lost that day. Sudbury had a penalty really late. It was missed. Then up the other end, with about 2 minutes of added time left, Freya Simmons scores this brilliant free kick, and suddenly they've come away with 3 points. And I think that was quite an important moment, because, like you said, so much change has taken place. And had they started with a poor result, I don't know how the games that would have followed would have gone, because there's only 12 teams in their division this year. They've only, therefore, got 22 games to play. So a defeat in the opener would have been a setback for them. But ever since then, they had a win at Cambridge United, of course, who you mentioned. So they've already played Cambridge United, which I think is an important element of Sunday's game. And it's something that some of the players have mentioned as well, is that they don't really have they don't really have any doubts about what they're going to be up against on Sunday. And that was a 5-0 win on the road. And again, it was quite convincing. The Seaward game was pretty tight, and a draw was probably a fair result. And then again, the Cambridge City win on Tuesday was pretty good going. So yeah, in terms of results, I don't think City will have too many complaints at all. And the performance levels have grown a bit over the 4 games as well.
What has their style of football been like this year? We spoke about the coaching change. Obviously, Sean Howe's stepping away largely because of the desire to have a full-time person in that post and his commitments. He couldn't quite do that with a young family and whatnot. And they've obviously recruited Martin Herdman, which is certainly in terms of his CV a really exciting appointment. And he kind of does a dual role with the UEA as well. What kind of style have they moved to? Because from what I've heard and certainly from what I've read from some of your stuff, sounds like quite an attacking, quite a positive change that's been made in terms of the way they're trying to play now.
Yeah, I would definitely say attacking is the word, but I wouldn't put it down to a specific kind of possession-based style, because while City are trying to play it nicely and keep it on the floor, they also have the ability to mix it up a bit. And when they come up against more physical teams, they are not afraid of going long if they need to. And in fact, that was on display in the Cambridge City game. And I asked Tash Snelling about it, because both of her goals, which came in the first half, came on the turnover when City had to break quickly. And I think the first one came from the right flank, a ball going across, which she latched onto. And then the second, the shot from Catherine Stanley. It's worth going and watching the highlights if you're considering coming, because the wing play in particular has been pretty impressive. In terms of the formations Herdman has set them up with, he's kind of varied that as well. And it's been quite fluid in places, in that City look like they might be lining up in a back 3, but there's been, say, from left back, for example, Lauren Tomlinson, who was one of the players who came in the summer. She's looked like a left back, and then there's been times when she's played at left wing, and suddenly it brings on a bit more responsibility of the midfield. It's similar in some ways to the way that David Wagner likes City men to line up. I kind of see a few of those comparisons, because one player who has played every game, or who has started every game for City so far, is Katie Knights. Not many players have been ever present, but she has been, and she kind of plays in that Kenny McLean role, as in she's quite dependable in those midfield positions, and that allows the fullbacks to push on, and the wing backs occasionally. So those are a few kind of observations I've picked up, but it's been an interesting first few games.
And it's quite interesting because I think you spoke to people last year, and I spoke to Flo Allen, I spoke to a few players on occasion, Sean Howe's obviously as well. And whilst it was very much we'd like to go up, the feeling was that perhaps they needed to be a bit more cautious in terms of their expectations. This year there hasn't been any of that. You ask Pete, I think Martin Herdman, within about four seconds of an interview with my colleague Sam Seaman at that Wroxham game, mentioned the P word, promotion, and certainly the players have echoed that as well. It does feel that there's a real tunnel vision, I guess, on their targets this year, and they're not kind of shy of telling people what they're hoping to do.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the appointment of Herdman initially kind of signalled that intent, didn't it? Given his kind of experience in the game, he's coached in so many different countries, etc. But also the signings that they've made. I think Sarah Quantrill in goal looks a really solid addition. Because Bryony Williams was one of City's top performers last year, but for her to be able to work under someone like Quantrill, who is, she came from Ipswich Town, but she's played at the top level of the women's game for Arsenal and Chelsea as well, I believe. I think that signing was very solid. You've also got Shannon Shaw at the other end of the pitch, who also has a wealth of experience. And I think that was important. And that signing is probably why you're seeing Natasha Snelling at the minute in such good form, because I don't know whether the competition behind her has necessarily been there in recent years. Not that she hasn't performed for the last 10 or 11 seasons that she's been with the club. But I do think the fact that she's got Shaw behind her, who herself 2 against Cambridge United, I think that is giving her just a bit more of an edge to make sure she's scoring consistently.
Yeah, just finally then, for those people, as you said earlier, who maybe are undecided about coming or haven't even given a second thought about coming, what would you say to them to try and persuade them to get down to Carrow Road on Sunday?
Well, I think if you come to Carrow Road, then you're going to see a team who are full of confidence, but are also really, really humble as well. They're just from speaking to a few players and staff, they're so excited about the game themselves, and they're so, like you mentioned there regarding promotion, they're so eager to do well and they're so eager to push on. So I think they've already showed how good they can be on the big stage with that Ashford win and the County Cup game. But I think there's an element from the players about this Sunday that they don't really feel nervous about it, because having had those games previously, it's less of a daunting experience. So they're ready to perform, and I think they will perform, and the evidence has been there with the Cambridge United game. I also think it's a really good opportunity for the club and for the women's side of the club, in that the Ashford game was their last game of last season, so last home game of last season. So anyone who went to that game and enjoyed it, there then wasn't a next game the following week down at the Nest that they could go to. Whereas this week you've got the Cambridge United game, and then the following week City are back at the Nest. So if people come along on Sunday and enjoy it, then the opportunity is there to carry on going and enjoying this team. And with everything like the bus system that's been put in place to get people up to the Nest, I think, it's a really good opportunity to get more people on board. So I would urge people, like you say, if they haven't got a ticket yet, to secure themselves one.
Lovely stuff, George. Thank you very much. Clearly an opportunity for Norwich to record a win, an important win. It could take them back to the top of the division, depending on what Ashford do. And we'll obviously be watching it eagerly. And George and myself will be there on Sunday as well to take in and report on this game. So I'm really looking forward to it. Hope to see as many of you guys there as possible. Could be great to offer support to Martin and his side, who are doing very well at the moment. Have started very well, and of course a Carrow Road win could elevate them to another level. So that would be really good as well. George, thank you very much. And now I get to say a line that I've always wanted to say. Back to you in the studio, Adam.
Probably should unmute myself. There we go. That will round off that segment of the show. We've basically been going for nearly an hour now, so I think it's almost lunchtime. Connor, thanks for joining me this lunchtime. Thanks for all your comments and questions. We've hopefully rattled through, I think, all of them. If we've missed any, then we can only apologise, and we'll come around to those at another show if you can keep them and waiting. Of course, next week Norwich City got Stoke at home, so we're waiting for, I suppose, the clock is ticking on that one. Really looking forward to being back at Carrow Road. But as we already said, the women's team are there on Sunday, so if you're free on Sunday afternoon, then why not go to Carrow Road and take in Martin Herdman's side, and hopefully they can continue their positive start to the season as well. And with that, we will leave you. Enjoy your weekend. Enjoy the rest of your Friday. Hopefully the sun will remain shining. Or if it's too hot, then get in front of the fan, and hopefully you can enjoy some, I suppose, international football if that's your cup of tea.